Ever cut someone off and never looked back? Right, I did, if so.
Picture this moment frozen in time like a snapshot from one of those faded family albums tucked away in attics gathering dust, where I was just 17 years old staring at the two stark lines on a cheap drugstore pregnancy test in the cramped bathroom of my childhood home in that sleepy Ohio suburb where everyone knew your business before you did, and the biggest scandal was usually who skipped the Sunday potluck at First Baptist Church, my heart hammering against my ribs like the bass drum. During Friday night football games under those harsh stadium lights that lit up the whole small-town world, and instead of the comforting embrace I desperately craved from the people who had raised me through scraped knees and school plays, I faced the coldest rejection imaginable from my own parents, Harold and Evelyn Jenkins, declaring right there in our linoleum-floored kitchen that smelled of overcooked pot roast and the weight of unspoken expectations that I was no longer their daughter. Because this unplanned baby growing inside me shattered their carefully curated image of perfection tied to church sermons and community standing. Fast-forwarding 2 decades later to a life I had clawed out for myself through sheer grit and endless shifts at greasy diners and night classes that left me bleary-eyed but determined, with doors metaphorically bolted against the ghosts of that painful past until those same stone-faced parents appeared uninvited on my doorstep in Columbus, their grins stretched thinner than the budget tires on their old sedan and faker than the promises in a late-night infomercial, begging with voices laced in artificial honey to finally meet their grandson after years of radio silence that echoed louder than any apology could fill. And in that charged instant, I could have slammed the door shut on their hypocrisy or unleashed a torrent of words long bottled up like vintage wine turned to vinegar, but where would the satisfaction lie in such a straightforward dismissal when the real poetry of payback simmered in something far more subtle and devastating? So I stepped aside with a calm that belied the storm inside me and let the little one, innocent and wide-eyed, swing open the door to greet them, watching as their meticulously rehearsed smiles evaporated in a heartbeat like morning mist under a relentless sun, their worlds tilting on the axis of a truth they never saw coming, leaving me to savor the slow burn of revelation that promised to linger long after their car pulled away, the kind of ending that doesn't tie up neatly but hangs in the air like the unanswered questions from a family reunion gone sour, pulling you deeper into the wreckage to wonder if blood truly binds or just bleeds out over time. I still recall every jagged detail of how it all unraveled back then in that suffocating summer of my senior year, when the air hung heavy with the scent of cut grass from neighbors' lawns mowed precisely to impress the HOA, and the distant hum of factory shifts winding down at Harold's auto plant where he toiled away his days fixing parts that kept America's cars rolling while preaching at home about moral engines running clean, sitting across from them at our scarred oak dining table under the yellow glow of a single bulb that cast long shadows like accusations, my palms slick with sweat as I mustered the courage to confess about the pregnancy with Tommy, my high school sweetheart whose broad shoulders and easy laugh had swept me off my feet during stolen moments behind the bleachers after cheer practice, his excitement bubbling over about an upcoming football scholarship to a state school that seemed worlds away from our cul-de-sac existence, but their reactions twisted the air. Thicker than the humidity outside, Harold's thick-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose as his face contorted from initial disbelief to a rage that made his knuckles whiten around his coffee mug, slamming it down so hard that brown liquid sloshed across the tablecloth embroidered with crosses from Evelyn's sewing circle, bellowing that I had dragged the Jenkins name through the mud worse than any Rust Belt scandal whispered at the corner bar, while Evelyn, her hands fluttering to clutch the faux pearls around her neck like a lifeline to propriety, let tears carve silent tracks down her powdered cheeks, not out of sorrow for my terror, but for the imagined gossip that would ripple through the pews and bridge games where she held court as the epitome of devoted motherhood. They didn't waste a breath on questions about my future or support for the life I carried. Instead, that very evening as cicadas droned their relentless chorus outside the screen door, they rummaged through my room with mechanical efficiency, stuffing faded jeans, a few threadbare sweaters, and my diary filled with dreams of college art classes into a battered duffel bag, tossing in a crumpled $20 bill as if it were pity money for a street corner beggar, instructing me in voices flat as the Midwest plains to be gone by first light so the paperboy peddling his route wouldn't catch sight of their fallen daughter and tarnish their spotless facade forever, leaving me to stumble out into the pre-dawn chill with nothing but a backpack and a belly just beginning to round under the oversized flannel shirt I wore like armor, boarding a Greyhound bus that rattled northward toward uncertainty. The seat sticky with the remnants of other lost souls' journeys, and the engine's growl mirroring the nausea churning in my gut. Those initial months blurred into a relentless grind of survival in Dayton, a city that felt both too big and too indifferent with its sprawling warehouses and corner stores hawking lottery dreams to the weary. Crashing first on my second cousin Rita's sagging couch in her shotgun rental, where the air reeked of cigarette smoke and overboiled cabbage. Her patience fraying after weeks of my retching into the shared toilet and midnight cravings for saltines that she begrudgingly supplied until she suggested I move on before we both cracked under the strain, forcing me to navigate the classifieds for waitress gigs at diners where the menus featured bottomless coffee and pie slices big enough to drown sorrows in. The grease from fryers clinging to my skin like a second layer of regret while tips trickled in slower than rain in a drought, all of it compounded by the isolation of doctor visits in sterile clinics that smelled sharply of bleach and broken expectations. Staring alone at grainy ultrasound images of a tiny heartbeat flickering like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep when Tommy's calls dwindled to excuses about practice schedules and the allure of campus freedom, his voice fading into static until silence swallowed him whole, leaving me to choose the name Jake for the boy kicking insistently inside me, drawn from memories of my grandfather who had spun tales of fishing trips and moral compasses that pointed true north without judgment during holiday gatherings before cancer claimed him. I pushed through the haze by enrolling in evening classes at the local community college, the fluorescent-lit classrooms a stark contrast to the dim motels I bounced between when rent for a shared room edged too close to eviction notices. Balancing textbooks on my swollen belly while scribbling notes on child development and basic accounting, determined that this child would inherit a legacy of tenacity rather than the abandonment I had tasted so bitterly, and as labor pains gripped me in a delivery room echoing with the cries of other newborns, I gripped the bed rails until my fingers ached, bringing Jake into the world with a wail that pierced the fluorescent buzz and filled the void where family support should have stood. His downy head cradled against my chest in those first hazy hours at anchor against the storm of postpartum blues and the stack of hospital bills that loomed like thunderclouds. Life carved out a fragile rhythm in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and neighbors whose arguments seeped through thin walls like unwanted advice, where I heated canned soup on a single hot plate that sparked ominously and laughed through gritted teeth at the absurdity of mistaking baby formula for my morning creamer during one sleep-deprived dawn. The gritty sweetness, a reminder that improvisation was my new normal, fostering Jake's first words and steps on that worn linoleum, while dodging pitying glances from single moms at the laundromat who swapped stories of deadbeat dads over folding tables, their camaraderie a makeshift family that patched the holes left by blood ties severed too soon. Yet beneath the daily hustle, resentment toward Harold and Evelyn festered like an untreated wound, especially when holiday cards from distant relatives trickled in with photos of their church choir poses and vague mentions of my adventures. Fueling a quiet fire that led to my first act of reclamation, an anonymous note slipped to the local gazette detailing how the pious deacon's wife had quietly withdrawn from food drives while lecturing on charity from the pulpit. Nothing explosive, but enough to spark murmurs at the next community bake sale and force Evelyn to field uncomfortable queries with her trademark tight-lipped smile. A petty satisfaction that warmed me like contraband cocoa on a frigid night without appending the delicate balance I had forged. As Jake toddled into preschool with crayons clutched in chubby fists and I advanced to a cashier role at a big-box store that offered health insurance just in time for his checkups, the past seemed destined to stay buried until that rainy Tuesday afternoon when a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox, postmarked from the old hometown with Evelyn's elegant script addressing it to me, its weight heavier than paper alone should carry, stirring a whirlwind of dread and defiant curiosity as I held it unopened, wondering if this intrusion heralded reconciliation or merely another layer of the indifference that had defined them all along. That envelope lingered on my cluttered kitchen counter for a full week like an unwelcome intruder refusing to budge amid the chaos of Jake's kindergarten backpack slung over a chair and the half-empty coffee mugs from my bleary-eyed mornings before hauling him off to school and myself to another double shift at the diner where the sizzle of bacon on the griddle drowned out the chatter of truckers nursing hangovers with bottomless refills, its crisp edges curling slightly in the humid air that seeped through the apartment's ill-fitting windows overlooking a parking lot dotted with rusting sedans and the occasional stray cat prowling for scraps, but eventually curiosity gnawed at me stronger than the hunger pangs during lean paydays. So one quiet evening after tucking Jake into his twin bed with tales spun from library books about intrepid explorers transforming shipwrecks into thriving islands far from judgmental shores, I sliced it open under the harsh light of the single bulb above the sink that flickered like my wavering resolve, revealing a stiff invitation card to some distant family reunion etched with gold lettering and Evelyn's looping cursive scrawled across the back in a message that purported to miss me without ever uttering the word sorry or acknowledging the void they had carved between us. The words ringing as empty as the promises in those chain emails circulating through the church ladies group about mending fences with divine intervention, prompting me to crumple it into a tight ball and hurl it toward the trash bin where it bounced off the rim and landed amid eggshells from breakfast, a small act of defiance that steadied my hands enough to pour a glass of tap water and stare out at the sodium-lit night, recommitting to the path I had forged without their map or approval. Single parenthood unfolded not as some glossy magazine spread of triumphant milestones, but as an unyielding marathon of scraped-together routines where dawn broke with Jake's insistent tugging at my sleeve for cereal poured from a box bought on sale and evenings blurred into baths drawn in a tub ringed with the residue of hurried days. The apartment's thin walls amplifying the symphony of neighboring televisions blaring sitcom laugh tracks that mocked my solitary laughter over microwave dinners heated, while balancing the checkbook under a lamp that cast pools of yellow on unpaid utility notices. And doctor's appointments for Jake's persistent ear infections loomed like storm fronts on the calendar, draining the emergency fund I'd painstakingly built from overtime tips folded into a coffee can hidden in the cupboard. All while well-intentioned cashiers at the grocery checkout or fellow parents at school events offered unsolicited nods toward finding a stable partner to shoulder the load. As if my forays into awkward blind dates arranged by Rita or swipes on those early dating sites hadn't already dissolved into fizzling disappointments like the guy who vanished after glimpsing my towering stack of medical copays and the inkling of my complicated history. Yet amid the grind, I clambered upward with the ferocity of someone who had learned early that opportunity rarely knocked politely, but required kicking down doors. Securing a promotion to office manager at a modest logistics company in the heart of Columbus after years of proving my reliability through endless spreadsheets tracking shipments of auto parts that ironically echoed Harold's old factory life. The steady paycheck finally affording Jake a spot on the Little League team where he dashed across dusty fields in a uniform perpetually grass-stained from slides into bases executed with a determination I traced back to the stories I whispered about overcoming odds during bedtime rituals. His victories under the weekend sun at community parks a balm against the isolation of holidays spent at potluck suppers with other single mothers swapping recipes for budget casseroles and tales of exes who faded like summer tan lines. Light-hearted moments pierced the heavier days, such as the fiasco when I mistakenly laundered Jake's favorite blue shirt with a load of reds, turning it a vibrant purple that he proudly wore to school anyway, dubbing it his superhero cape and earning giggles from classmates that eased the sting of my exhaustion, or the evenings we improvised fortresses from couch cushions and bed sheets in the living room carpeted with threadbare remnants from thrift store finds, giggling over flashlight shadow puppet shows where I voiced a wisecracking dragon guarding treasures of resilience against marauding doubts. Those shared chuckles weaving a tapestry of joy that fortified us against the world's sharper edges without needing the validation of blood relatives who had chosen silence over solidarity. As Jake stretched into adolescence, his frame lanky and inquisitive like a young sapling pushing through concrete, questions about his absent grandparents surfaced during quiet car rides home from soccer practice or while sorting through the shoebox of faded photographs I kept stowed in the closet amid moth-eaten scarves. His brow furrowing over images of Harold in his Sunday best or Evelyn arranging flowers for the altar, and I navigated those inquiries with carefully measured half-truths, painting them as folks perpetually occupied with church commitments and community service that left little room for personal ties, shielding him from the raw edges of rejection that still occasionally surfaced in my dreams as echoes of that greyhound's rumble carrying me away, preferring he view family through the lens of chosen bonds rather than fractured ones that might taint his budding sense of self. The undercurrent of bitterness toward my parents persisted, bubbling up like foam on a shaken soda during news of Harold's retirement from the plant, complete with a pension parade at the local VFW hall where they toasted his decades of service amid balloons and sheet cake, a comfort I contrasted sharply with my own patchwork of gig economies and side hustles that kept the lights on but left no margin for vacations or the college funds other parents bragged about at PTA meetings, fueling a calculated spark of retribution when Jake's high school graduation loomed on the horizon like a beacon of our shared endurance, prompting me to mail them a glossy print of him in cap and gown, arms raised in triumph on the auditorium stage surrounded by cheering friends whose families filled the seats, the accompanying note succinct and pointed with just thriving, "No thanks to you," inscribed below, a dispatch that surely arrived like an unexpected frost in their manicured garden. The ensuing ripples through the family grapevine reaching me via Rita's occasional calls about Evelyn's flustered explanations at bridge club and Harold's muttered discomfort over backyard barbecues, the petty thrill of that exposure warming me through a solitary toast. With boxed wine on my balcony overlooking the city lights, a momentary tilt in the scales that affirmed my autonomy without derailing the momentum we had built. Just when stability seemed within grasp, with Jake launching into adulthood via a welding certificate from the trade school that promised solid union jobs in the booming manufacturing sector, and me eyeing a modest savings for a down payment on a house that whispered of roots rather than rentals, life hurled another twist worthy of a soap opera script when he burst through the door one crisp fall evening after his shift, his tool belt still slung over his shoulder and face flushed with a mix of elation and apprehension that mirrored my own from 2 decades prior, announcing over a hurried dinner of takeout pizza that he and his girlfriend Mia, the quick-witted barista from the corner cafe with dreams of nursing school, were expecting a baby conceived in the heat of their passionate early months together, a revelation that tightened my throat around a bite of crust as memories flooded back of drugstore tests and kitchen confrontations, yet softened by the maturity in his eyes and the way he clasped Mia's hand across the table. Their decision to name the child Ethan if it was a boy carrying forward a legacy of hope rather than haste. Though the pregnancy progressed with complications that landed Mia in the hospital for monitoring and me shuttling between work and waiting rooms that smelled of stale vending machine snacks and worry, the premature arrival of little Ethan into the NICU's incubators tugging at every fiber of the grandmother I had become unexpectedly. His fragile form connected to tubes, a poignant echo that bound our family tighter even as it stretched my resources thin with drives to specialized pediatricians and the purchase of a second car seat for my aging sedan. In the midst of this whirlwind adjustment, where my living room transformed into a nursery annex with swings and bottles cluttering the coffee table once reserved for Jake's homework, another envelope materialized in the mailbox one overcast morning, this one bearing Harold's blocky handwriting and a thickness that suggested more than mere pleasantries, its contents unfolding to reveal a direct plea for reconciliation framed around their desire to meet the newest addition to the family line, words dripping with a contrived tenderness about legacies and lost time that made my stomach churn like bad diner eggs. Leaving me to pace the kitchen floor with Ethan's soft whimpers drifting from the baby monitor, torn between the finality of barring the door forever and the tantalizing prospect of confrontation that might finally exorcise the shadows they cast so long. Embracing the role of grandmother amid the whirlwind of Ethan's arrival reshaped my days into a tapestry of unexpected tenderness intertwined with the familiar strains of makeshift support. Where mornings dawned with the soft patter of tiny feet if Mia had an early class and Jake's welding shift pulled him away before the coffee brewed strong enough to chase away the remnants of interrupted sleep. My three-bedroom house in the quieter suburbs of Columbus now serving as a bustling hub that echoed with the coos and cries of a newborn whose every milestone felt like a victory lap over the uncertainties that had once defined my own early motherhood. The glider chair in the nursery becoming my throne for rocking sessions that stretched into afternoons while sunlight filtered through curtains I'd sewn from discount fabric, humming half-remembered lullabies from my grandmother's repertoire to soothe his fretful gums during teething flares that left us both bleary and bonded in exhaustion. Jake dove into fatherhood with the same unyielding focus he applied to welding intricate metal frameworks at the fabrication shop, where sparks flew like miniature fireworks under his steady hands. Balancing overtime hours that paid for Mia's textbooks and the specialized formula Ethan needed after those NICU weeks, while she juggled steaming lattes at the corner cafe with online lectures on anatomy that promised a nursing career to secure their future beyond the hand-to-mouth rhythm I'd known too well, and I wove myself into their routine by stocking the shelves with jars of those overpriced purees that masqueraded as gourmet meals for babies, their bland pea-green hue a far cry from the canned equivalents I'd stretched during Jake's toddler years, often lightening the load with wry observations over family dinners about how Ethan seemed to inherit my knack for dramatic midnight wake-ups that turned the house into a comedy of errors, like the time a spilled bottle soaked the remote control mid-movie night, leaving us fumbling for channels in the dark while laughter bubbled up to dispel the fatigue. Those correspondences from my parents escalated in frequency right on the heels of Ethan's homecoming photo circulating through Mia's extended family grapevine. Likely her aunt's enthusiastic sharing at a baby shower that bridged unwitting connections back to the old Ohio network, each missive arriving like clockwork on Tuesdays when the mail carrier's truck rumbled down the cul-de-sac. Envelopes sealed with wax stamps that evoked outdated formality and filled with passages cherry-picked from scripture on themes of prodigal returns and familial grace, Evelyn's handwriting flowing in elegant loops that encircled sentiments about the enduring pull of bloodlines now manifesting in this new little Jenkins. Phrases that twisted my gut with their selective amnesia regarding the night they had severed those very ties with the finality of a locked gate at dusk. I dispatched the initial batch to the recycling bin after a cursory scan, their paper whispering against the cardboard as if protesting the dismissal. But the volume built to an insistent crescendo that chipped away at my resolve during quieter evenings when Ethan dozed in his bassinet and the house settled into a hush broken only by the tick of the wall clock inherited from Rita, culminating in that fateful call one harvest season twilight as I stirred a pot of spaghetti sauce on the stove where garlic and tomatoes simmered into a comforting aroma that masked the undercurrent of irritation rising like steam, the phone's trill cutting through the sizzle and displaying an area code that yanked me straight back to the flatlands of my youth. Harold's voice emerging gravelly and hesitant after decades of disuse between us, launching into a monologue laced with tales of his recent cardiac episode that had him sidelined from woodworking projects and Evelyn's joints aching fiercer than winter winds. Through the eaves, framing their outreach as a quest for closure before time slipped away entirely, the grandson positioned as the key to unlocking some ethereal peace they described in terms borrowed from Sunday school pamphlets. I maintained a veneer of civility throughout the exchange, my free hand gripping the wooden spoon like an anchor as I inquired after the old neighborhood's changes, the new strip mall swallowing the 5-and-dime, the church steeples still piercing the skyline, and allowed him to unspool anecdotes that revealed more about their isolation than intended, then deftly inserted a casual remark about Ethan's distinctive features that echoed certain familial quirks they might spot upon meeting him. A Vague allusion delivered with the nonchalance of discussing weather patterns to pique their interest without yielding ground, and when Harold circled back to pressing for an in-person visit, I parried with a humorous deflection about our schedule resembling a jammed printer at the office, perpetually backed up but promising to consider it seriously, concluding the call with a polite sign-off that left him undoubtedly replaying the conversation in their dimly lit living room, dissecting my words for hidden invitations while I savored the subtle power play over a plate of pasta that tasted of vindication. A revenge served cool and calculated that exposed the fragility of their overtures without escalating to outright confrontation. As autumn leaves carpeted the backyard in fiery hues and Ethan's first holidays approached with the scent of pumpkin pies baking in community center kitchens where Jake and Mia volunteered for extra cash, the dilemma gnawed at me during solitary walks pushing the stroller along leaf-strewn paths, one part of my psyche yearning to fortify barriers against their opportunistic warmth that reeked of convenience, tied to legacy rather than genuine remorse, while another voice, softer and laced with the weariness of years, pondered whether orchestrated exposure might illuminate for Ethan the contours of chosen kin versus obligatory blood, an internal tug-of-war that invited second thoughts on my hardening stance and might prompt listeners to furrow brows at my hesitation to extend even a tentative olive branch after such prolonged silence. Jake picked up on the undercurrents during a casual supper of grilled burgers on the patio where smoke curled lazily into the cooling air, his fork pausing mid-bite as he probed about the Ohio specters, stirring again through those persistent letters cluttering the mail pile, and I deflected with a chuckle likening them to persistent door-to-door salesmen peddling outdated encyclopedias no one needed in the age of search engines. But the true pivot arrived unexpectedly when Mia, ever the organizer during a thorough spring cleaning that banished winter's dust bunnies from the attic corners, unearthed a forgotten photo album bound in cracked leather amid boxes of holiday ornaments and tax records, its pages fluttering open to reveal snapshots of my youth interspersed with images of siblings, including my brother Daniel, whose boyish grin in a Little League uniform belied the shadows that had driven him away at 19 following a heated clash with Harold over a minor infraction twisted into felony proportions by parental decree, town rumors swirling about his enlistment in the armed forces or a vanishing act to distant coasts that the family had shrouded in euphemisms of rebellious phases, the discovery sparking a cascade of queries from Mia's curious eyes and Jake's deepening frown that compelled me to divulge fragments of that buried narrative, admitting how the Jenkins household had fractured along fault lines of control and conformity long before my pregnancy ignited the final schism. Hints of unresolved grievances that my parents might now pursue under the guise of grandparental longing rather than mere nostalgia. By the time their subsequent letter materialized, thicker with itinerary details and a firmly penciled date for their northward trek, my defenses yielded just sufficiently to pen a measured acceptance laced with another enigmatic reference to Ethan's particular heritage that would render the encounter indelible, a strategic breadcrumb trail that heightened their eagerness while steeling me for the gathering tempest, the calendar's inexorable march toward that appointed Saturday filling the house with an electric anticipation that hummed like the fluorescent lights in my old diner days, culminating in the insistent chime of the doorbell precisely on time, its peal slicing through the afternoon quiet and propelling me toward the threshold where faces from the past waited, their motives perhaps more layered than the simple yearning for a child's embrace. Committing to their visit carried the precarious thrill of navigating a minefield disguised as a welcome mat, where every step toward hospitality risked detonating the buried resentments that had simmered for years beneath the surface of my carefully constructed life in that modest Columbus neighborhood, where maple trees arched over sidewalks cracked from winter freezes, and neighbors exchanged waves over shared recycling bins, so I channeled the intervening weeks into preparations that danced a fine line between genuine accommodation and orchestrated unease, methodically filling the pantry with off-brand cereals and canned goods that evoked the thrift of my early struggles rather than the artisanal spreads Evelyn might have anticipated from her tales of upscale church suppers. while coaching Jake on evasive chit-chat about his welding projects that highlighted self-made success without inviting probes into the absences that shaped him, and reassuring Mia, whose anxiety manifested in endless checklists scribbled on napkins during Ethan's nap times, her hands twisting dish towels as we rehearsed greetings that balanced warmth with wariness in the kitchen, alive with the aroma of simmering chili meant to stretch across generations without favoritism. The house underwent a surface-level refresh, vacuums humming over rugs that concealed spills from countless family game nights, and fresh linens draped across the guest room bed once used for Jake's teenage sleepovers. Though I skipped the deep clean of the attic where dust motes still swirled around relics of my past, preserving a deliberate authenticity that might underscore how far I'd come without their interference. All the while my thoughts churned with profound dilemmas about the truths I would parcel out during their stay, particularly after the photo album's revelations had peeled back layers of family lore I had long compartmentalized to protect the fragile piece of our present, the images of Daniel frozen in boyhood innocence clashing against the adult realities of his disappearance that now loomed as potential leverage or liability in this reunion. Their communications warmed incrementally in the lead-up, Harold's emails arriving with attachments of his latest birdhouse constructions whittled from scrap pine in the garage that doubled as his workshop. Descriptions laced with metaphors of nests and new beginnings that struck me as contrived as an infomercial pitch for eternal youth, while Evelyn enclosed a handmade Afghan for Ethan crocheted in pastel yarns that frayed at the corners like their belated affections, prompting me to respond with curated updates on his latest antics, rolling over with triumphant grunts or clutching toys with fierce determination, yet artfully omitting details that might humanize the encounter too soon, nurturing their eagerness as one might tend a garden plot destined for an unexpected harvest of discomfort. Amid these machinations, a thread of humor threaded through my darker schemings, such as the experimental batch of welcome pie I baked from a recipe clipped from the community bulletin board, its crust emerging uneven and the filling bubbling over in a manner that prompted Jake to quip it resembled the family's own lopsided history. Our shared laughter over the charred edges, diffusing the tension that knotted my shoulders during solitary evenings when Ethan fussed, and the weight of impending confrontation pressed like an uninvited guest on the couch. Yet the internal strife deepened as I grappled with the ethics of inviting them into this sanctuary of chosen love. A space brimming with the authenticity of Jake's proud grin after a long shift and Mia's gentle stories read to Ethan under the glow of a bedside lamp, temptations to withhold revelations warring with the allure of witnessing their unease firsthand. A vengeful calculus that might draw furrowed brows from those hearing my tale for skirting outright forgiveness in favor of calculated exposure after such extended estrangement. The narrative twisted further when, amid the flurry of packing away seasonal decorations to make room for their suitcases, an unexpected letter from Daniel materialized in the mailbox, forwarded by a long-dormant relative whose address I'd shared in a moment of nostalgia years prior. Its envelope weathered and postmarked from a coastal town in California where he had apparently carved out a life as a mechanic with a family of his own, the contents penned in his familiar scrawl inquiring after my whereabouts and expressing bewilderment at the parental silence that had severed him from the fold, oblivious to Ethan's existence, but laced with questions about Harold and Evelyn's unchanging rigidity that mirrored my own grievances. The discovery halting me mid-stride in the hallway as sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating words that humanized the brother I'd mythologized into absence, sparking an impulsive late-night conversation with Jake over mugs of herbal tea in the dim kitchen where I unveiled portions of that sibling schism. The explosive argument over a joyride gone awry escalated into exile by Harold's unyielding decree, and his widened eyes reflected the shock that Ethan's impending introduction might amplify if old wounds intersected with new ones, prompting me to wonder whether my plotting echoed the very omissions that had fractured us all in the first place. My sharpest stroke of ingenuity unfolded in a pre-arrival email dispatch, attaching a carefully cropped photograph of our family gathering that framed Jake and Mia beaming beside the playpen, but obscured Ethan's full visage behind a strategically placed teddy bear. The caption a teasing, eager for you to see the complete portrait in person, that elicited a flurry of replies from Harold brimming with anticipatory queries about resemblances and traits, which I left unanswered to let the ambiguity ferment like yeast in dough, relishing the inversion of power as they plotted their route northward along interstates lined with billboards hawking family vacations they had denied me, their aging sedan cresting the final hill into my driveway on the appointed Saturday afternoon with the precision of a scheduled sermon. Harold easing out first with his characteristic deliberation that spoke of factory-honed patience, and Evelyn alighting beside him clutching a bulky gift bag that sagged under the weight of presumed reparations. But as they approached the porch steps, gravel crunching under sensible shoes, my meticulously laid plan encountered a minor derailment when Ethan's usually placid demeanor shattered into uncharacteristic wails from his indoor playpen, the piercing cries wafting through the slightly ajar window like an omen carried on the breeze, freezing me momentarily with the key in the lock as the reality of unscripted chaos intruded upon my orchestration, the air thickening with the prelude to revelations that no amount of preparation could fully contain, the doorbell's impending ring now echoing in my mind as the threshold to reckonings long deferred. As the tires of their weathered sedan ground to a halt on the gravel driveway that I'd meticulously raked just days earlier to present a tidy facade amid the overgrown wildflowers bordering the edges, like nature's quiet rebellion against imposed order, time itself seemed to elongate in the manner of those endless summer afternoons from my Ohio childhood, when the heat waves distorted the horizon, and every second stretched under the weight of anticipation, Harold extricating his tall, slightly stooped figure from behind the wheel with the deliberate motions honed from decades of assembly line precision, where haste meant hazards and carelessness could cost a finger or a fortune, while Evelyn emerged from the passenger side, smoothing the wrinkles from her knee-length floral skirt as though erasing the creases of 20 years' neglect in one practiced gesture, their expressions a veneer of rehearsed benevolence that failed to mask the underlying calculations flickering in their eyes. Much like the faulty porch light that buzzed intermittently on humid evenings, the kind of superficial amiability one encounters at obligatory reunions or neighborhood block parties where small talk veils deeper divides. I positioned myself on the front steps with arms loosely folded in a posture that conveyed measured hospitality rather than outright embrace, my pulse quickening to the rhythm of distant traffic humming along the interstate that carried dreams and disappointments alike into the city, exchanging banal pleasantries about the journey's tribulations. The snarled knots of construction delays near the state line, the golden fields of corn swaying under a sky unmarred by the industrial haze of their hometown, before guiding them across the threshold into the living room where the scent of freshly baked oatmeal cookies mingled with the subtle undertone of baby powder and the faint citrus cleaner from my morning scrub, Jake lingering awkwardly in the adjacent kitchen doorway with Mia at his side, both offering greetings that landed with the stiffness of starched collars at a formal dinner. Their words polite, but laced with the unspoken history that hung heavier than the framed family portraits adorning the mantelpiece, capturing Jake's high school diploma ceremony and Ethan's inaugural holiday amid twinkling lights and wrapped gifts. They navigated the space with appraising glances, Evelyn commenting on the cozy arrangement of the sectional sofa facing the brick fireplace, where embers from last winter's fires still whispered of warmth earned through effort, and Harold nodding in agreement while his gaze swept over the bookshelves crammed with Jake's trade manuals on metallurgy and Mia's nursing textbooks dog-eared from late-night studies, their compliments threaded with inadvertent barbs about envisioning grander homes for multi-generational gatherings like the sprawling farmhouses and church directories or the colonial revivals favored by their social circle. Observations that stirred a wry amusement within me at the irony of their projections onto a life sculpted from necessity rather than inheritance. The air thickening as Ethan's intermittent gurgles drifted from the nursery down the hall like tentative invitations to the main event they had traversed states to witness. The dialogue meandered through safe territories, skirting the chasm of the past with discussions of Jake's burgeoning career fabricating structural beams for local bridges that spanned rivers swollen with spring thaws, and Mia's aspirations to specialize in pediatric care inspired by Ethan's own rocky start. But an undercurrent of tension rippled beneath like the current in those very waterways. My light-hearted remark about repurposing Harold's birdhouses as quirky napkin holders eliciting a chuckle from him that cracked the facade just enough to reveal the strain of unfamiliar terrain, and as the baby's sounds grew more insistent, their postures shifted forward with palpable hunger for the redemption they sought through this tiny intermediary, Evelyn's fingers twitching toward her ever-present pearl necklace in a habit that betrayed nerves akin to those before delivering a testimony at Bible study. I might have prolonged the prelude indefinitely, circulating trays of iced tea sweetened with honey from the farmer's market and steering conversations toward neutral ground like the latest community fair with its Ferris wheels creaking under laughter and cotton candy dissolving on tongues. But the cumulative pressure of decades pressed inexorably, propelling me to excuse myself briefly to retrieve the child from his sun-dappled crib, where he lay kicking at a mobile of wooden stars I'd crafted during a rainy weekend project, his warm weight settling trustingly into my arms as a symbol of the unyielding love that had sustained us through tempests they could scarcely imagine, then passing him to Jake with a subtle cue born of shared glances honed over years of navigating life's curveballs, calling out in a tone laced with feigned casualness that the grandson awaited their acquaintance in the heart of the gathering space. With Jake cradling Ethan and nudging the nursery door ajar to facilitate the entrance, the moment crystallized as their expectant smiles, those meticulously curated beams of paternalistic joy polished like silverware for company, held suspended for a suspended breath before fracturing into expressions of unadulterated dismay, eyes bulging in tandem at the sight of the infant not as the pale, blue-eyed facsimile of Jenkins' lineage they had undoubtedly conjured from faded portraits and selective bloodline fantasies, but as a radiant child with Mia's rich caramel complexion glowing under the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains and Jake's inherited dark curls framing a face alight with unfiltered curiosity. The truth unfolding that Ethan had joined our family through an open adoption process navigated in the shadowed aftermath of Mia's heartbreaking fertility challenges and Jake's empathetic resolve to expand their circle beyond biology. A deliberate choice whispered among us during tear-streaked nights in hospital corridors and celebrated quietly with legal papers signed under the hum of fluorescent office lights, rendering him no direct descendant in their rigidly defined hierarchy of heritage, but a testament to the broader kinships forged in choice and commitment rather than chromosomes alone. The room plunged into a stunned hush broken solely by Ethan's oblivious bubble of delight as he reached chubby fingers toward the strangers who recoiled imperceptibly, Harold's complexion draining to the pallor of overcast skies as he fumbled for coherence in a mutter about possible misunderstandings in the family tree, Evelyn's grip tightening on her pearls until the string threatened to snap like the illusions sustaining her worldview shaped by potluck preachings and exclusionary pews, and I observed from the periphery with arms crossed once more, allowing the revelation to seep in unassisted by accusation or elaboration. The revenge manifesting not in explosive tirades or theatrical exits, but in the poignant unraveling of their presumptuous empire built on notions of purity and possession. A satisfying denouement laced with the subtle wit of irony where their pursuit of legacy boomeranged into confrontation with its very fluidity, the kind of payback that lingers like the aftertaste of a bitter herb in a healing tea. As they collected their belongings in a fog of disjointed apologies citing the exigencies of the return drive and vague assurances of future correspondence that rang as hollow as their initial overtures, shuffling toward the door with the gift bag dangling forgotten from Harold's hand, I accompanied them to the porch where the late sun painted the yard in amber hues, waving farewell with a sincerity untainted by pretense as Ethan mimicked the gesture from Jake's hip with uninhibited glee, their sedan receding down the drive like a chapter closing on an unfinished book, leaving me to contemplate amid the settling dusk whether such exposures mended the fractures of blood or merely highlighted their irreparable width. The ambiguities swirling like fireflies in the gathering twilight to provoke reflections on forgiveness's true cost and the enduring enigma of ties that bind or simply bind us in place.